Thank you. So I'm going to try doing this without a mic. And if, like, the people in the back there, if you suddenly cannot hear me, just, like, wave your ears at me, and I'll speak up a little bit. So I was asked to come here and speak, give a lecture about whatever I wanted for 40 minutes, and then have a Q&A. And as I was sitting and thinking about what to talk about, I realized I have no idea why you all would come listen to me talk for an hour. So I'm like, why don't I flip around a little bit? So I'm going to give you kind of a quick, just a few minutes, maybe 10, 15 minutes or so about my company, about what we do, and about myself and how I ended up where I am today. So it will be kind of a shorter intro. And then I hope that whatever questions you have, whatever things you want to discuss, whatever topics you want to kind of dig into, fill them out in the app that's going to come up, and then we're going to have those questions. And I'm going to try to answer to the best of my ability, whether it's about AI or entrepreneurship or whatever it is, really. So that's kind of my goal, and we'll see how this goes. And I haven't quite done this before, so we'll see how we end up. But yeah, feel free to ask anything you want. To start off a little bit, kind of credentials and what I do today. So I'm the CEO of iris.ai. I have one of my co-founders on the corner over there, if you can wave. And if you have any questions about iris.ai at the end of the talk as well, feel free to go up to him and kind of attack him with all the questions. So I do that, and I'll talk a little bit more about what we do in a second. I'm also very excited about being on the board of a company that is more than 100 years old. It's a shipbuilding company, a shipyard, and a design company called Ulstein that's on the west coast of Norway. And it's really interesting to be kind of both in this like AI startup that is also now dabbling into the blockchain space, and also sit in this like really kind of old, lovely family business that's been running for more than a century. I'm also a faculty member at Singularity University. I did go through the Singularity University, it's called the Global Solutions Program, which is a summer-long program at NASA Ames Research Park. I did that in 2015, and then I was asked to join them as a faculty member a couple of years later. So as of the last 8 months, I've been a faculty member at the department in Copenhagen that opened there recently. And so what I do there is I hold talks on artificial intelligence, essentially. I talk to a lot of executives, a lot of kind of young and upcoming leaders that need to dive into the crazy world that is kind of futuristic, exponential technology, and AI is the thing that I can talk about. And I get to do a lot of those talks, which is exciting. I also do mentorship of some startups in a Catapult Accelerator in Norway. And I very recently became a columnist in a newspaper as well. But I have a tendency to say yes to things that sound fun. And that's kind of where I've ended up where I am. I'll go into my journey later, but very briefly about iris.ai. As you can tell from the name, we're an AI startup company. It was founded during our time at Singularity University in 2015. And the reason why we started it, and it's kind of the right approach to starting a company. You start with a team, and you sit down, and you start looking at what problems can we solve. And you find a problem you want to solve, and then you look at it and say, how the heck do we solve that problem? And then you find the right technology. And then you start building. And that's what we did, challenged by Singularity University. The question was, how can you positively impact the lives of 1 billion people within the next 10 years? And we're like, good question. How can we do that? We started talking, discussing this, and what we found that we had a passion in common about was science and academic research and research literature, and the incredible amount of knowledge that we hold as a human species all at large, and the fact that it is incredibly inaccessible for most people, even for researchers. And that's kind of the problem we looked at. We looked at, how can you get people to publish failed results? How can you make it more accessible? How can you tear down the paywalls? We looked at a number of different kind of skewed incentives in the publishing industry. And then we ended up with what iris.ai is or is becoming today, which is an artificially intelligent researcher, or an AI that can actually do research for us and with us. And that is kind of our 10-year undertaking to build an artificial intelligence that do research for us. And if we take that to exactly what it is we do today, because we are a business, we do make revenue from corporates, and what we do is that we semi-automate the early stage of the research process. So as a researcher, for those of you who don't know that field at all, the first thing you do when you kind of have a problem you want to explore, whether it's, you're going to write your PhD, or it's, your boss or your client came to you and said, here's a problem, fix it. So you kind of define the problem, what is it really I'm trying to solve, and then the first thing you do is you go out and figure out what have other people done before. And that can be quite an excruciating process. You do use, for example, the citation system. You find one research paper and you kind of follow the citation system. The citation system is incredibly biased, and that's one of the things I'm personally quite passionate about is bias in data. So we decided to scrap the citation system entirely, and we can have long discussions about the pros and cons of that, but that was our approach. And so you sit and do these like lengthy keyword queries, you search a bunch. If you're in academia, it will take you 3 to 6 months to do like this proper, solid, systematic mapping study. 99% accuracy or 99.8, depending on how you measure. And how you can measure that when you do it manually is an entirely different question. But that's the goal. And we've taken that mapping study. Of course, in industry, you don't do it that thoroughly. You don't have the time. You spend 2 to 4 weeks doing kind of ad hoc searching. You hope, we follow some professors on Twitter, and you kind of hope that you don't miss out. But you also know that you're missing out on a bunch of really important stuff. So basically what we've done is we've taken this academic, thorough, rigorous approach, applied a bunch of machine learning techniques, and turned it into about a 2-day process. And what we can get at today is in those 2 days, you can get about 85% precision and recall, or accuracy if you like, which is far better than what you can do in industry today in 2 to 4 weeks. So we save these R&D departments, millions of dollars per year. And that's where we're at today, right? We have our first trial licenses that we're delivering right now. The product is up and running and working, which is great. And we could be quite happy with that, right? We could just take this model, scale it up to a bunch of corporates, and get rich and sell the company and go home. The problem is that we've made this promise that we're going to positively impact the lives of 1 billion people. And while we enjoy working with these big corporates, we don't really think that that's how you go out and change the world. So we're no longer just an AI company. We're also a blockchain company, just to get with all the hype. But the thing that we realized was that if we want to really change something in this industry, it's not enough to build some cool software tools and go out there and just, sell them and that's it, right? You have to actually uproot an entire industry. And the academic publishing industry is in many ways, let's call it dysfunctional in the sense that it has incredibly wrong incentives, right? As an academic, you need to publish, 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 not look at what you published afterwards. You just need to get it out, right? It's the wrong incentives. It's just get it through peer review, get it out there, whatever it takes. And we want to change that. So I'm not going to go into too much technical details on it. We are drafting a full white paper that will be out within the next few weeks. I'm looking at Jacobo for that one. He's the main writer of it. And basically what we want to do, because we have a big community of AI trainers, people that are helping our tool learn by creating these annotated data sets. We got 8,000 people that have volunteered their time to help us. And we're like, that's awesome. We are a startup. We cannot afford to pay these people. We love their contributions. And we're like, okay, how about we tokenize this? We give them tokens for doing that. And on the other hand, they can use those tokens to access our premium services for free, right? Great. How about we do the same with coders, and we publish a bunch of our code open source, and we do the same for coders. We can have a lot of people contributing to this. And long story short, what we're building now is a community of people that together will build parts of these tools that will get incentivized for doing so. And when the big corporates come in and buy access, everyone in the community of researchers will benefit from that as the value of the tokens will increase, et cetera. And the bottom line here is that if we do this right, in the next 4, 5, 6 years, we can actually start paying researchers to publish good research. And that's when it starts looking like a really, really interesting economic model that can actually have the potential to uproot an entire industry. And that's kind of cool, and that's what we're working on right now. So that's what's on top of my mind. If you have any more questions on that, throw them up on the app. And actually, let me see. Okay, so that's more on the more on the personal side. Okay, so that was enough technical stuff then. I'll jump over to kind of my journey a little bit. So as one of the questions said, the latest question, gathering knowledge on AI without any previous academic courses. So let me take you kind of through a brief summary of my, I guess, last 12 years or so since I graduated high school. Okay, 14, fine. So I started out in theater. I was going to go to medical school. Let's start there. I was going to go to medical school, great grades, math, physics, chemistry, awesome. What we did in the area where I grew up was you go to medical school, become a doctor, potentially a lawyer, and that's it. And I was going to do that. I just had all these theater in my blood that I kind of felt like I needed to do something about. So I was going to do 1 year of theater. I did that. It was a hell of a lot of fun. Can I swear on Facebook Live?
Hell yeah.
Good. I also give some talks in the US every now and then, and there's a little bit more I always blame, I'm Scandinavian, we can swear, so. And I am Norwegian, if I forgot to say that. But anyway, I grew up in Norway. So I was going to go to medical school, good girls do, because you grow up in a nice area and you have good grades, you go to medical school. Went to theater school instead, had a lot of fun, and ended up doing a bachelor in that. It was never on my mind to actually start a company, but after the first year, we realized there are no jobs in theater. Fine, what do we do? And this friend of mine, and we may have been a little drunk, and we were on this vacation, and she's like, do you want to start a company with me? I'm like, yes, that sounds like a great idea. So we went and started a company, and then sat down and tried to figure out what this company was going to do. And our first business plan was kind of we're going to do theater stuff. And we started out with classes for kids and presentation techniques and performances, and eventually got into kind of more and more the businessy space. And we worked for Statoil on this big, team building project. And I really got into the business part of things. I really enjoyed the process of running a company. But as I was kind of delving into, I went to a lot of, I'm not going to say I went to a lot of talks like this, because this was in Norway in 2009. And I don't know what you know about Norway, but we've become very fat and lazy with the oil, situation. So there wasn't a lot of startups. But the little I caught, I'm like, this is not scalable, right? Running a theater-based consultancy company is not scalable in the way I want it to be scalable. But we ran it for a few years. 2008 came. No one has money to deal with theater stuff in businesses when there's no money and you fire a lot of people. So we were without anything incoming. And I decided it was time to do something new. And then for me, a lot of the things that happen through the years is these random coincidences, right? It's at the right place, at the right time, I hear about this thing and I go, yes, I'm going to do that thing. I don't know what it is, but I'm just going to go do it. So I applied for this, it's called the Norwegian Entrepreneurship Program. Applied for that, randomly picked a location, because there's 6 different international locations, dove headfirst, and ended up in Silicon Valley. Without knowing it, without knowing anything about technology, suddenly I found myself doing an internship with a high-tech startup and absolutely loving it. And that's kind of when tech happened for me. And that's when I got into that. Going from I know how to summarize 2 cells in Excel, and I think that's pretty neat. But other than that, I don't like computers. That was the beginning of the summer, and 4 months later, I'm sure, I know, how MySQL work, and I can go in and fix a database, and just a little dabbling, that's fine, And so it was quite a steep learning curve, but I had a lot of fun, and I was working closely with all of our customers, and in between them and the product developers. So I was learning the language of the tech guys while, talking to our customers as well. Fast forward a little bit, I did that for 2 years. I was in the middle of that company as it crashed and burned. In fact, I was the only one left after the CEO left on the spot, and that's quite a dramatic story. But he left on the spot. Suddenly, I found myself alone in this company with some VCs that was tricky to deal with. Let's just leave it at that. And I figured it was time to get the hell out of Dodge City. So I left the US. I moved to Sweden. I was going to do a master's program in entrepreneurship, which to me, studying entrepreneurship is a tricky business, right? Because how do you do that? And I think Chalmers has solved it to a fair degree, because it's 1 year of classes, and then you actually start a company for a year, which is a really interesting way to do it. So we're sitting at a space, somewhat similar to this, not quite as fancy, and we were running a company for a year. During my first year, though, Rather than taking classes, I built a race car, which was a lot of fun. And competed in the world's largest student engineering competition, and we won, which was awesome. So that was quite an experience, suddenly being in hardware and building metal parts to this car, and that was fun. We also went to Kenya and did solar light entrepreneurship classes. That's a whole other story. Anyway, I'll fast forward a little bit because my story's been a little like this all along. We started this company at the end of as my master thesis. We're doing energy optimizing of heat exchanger networks in big process industry plants and factories. So heavy mathematical, very kind of deep tech, and in an industry that was really heavy and really old. I ran that for a year. At the end of it, I had the offer of taking over as a full owner and CEO, and because of the collaboration partner, I decided not to. And it's one of those things where, like, in retrospect, it wasn't necessarily because I was a girl, it wasn't necessarily because I was young, but it was just a really unpleasant work environment. And I think most of the women in the audience have been there, right? It's hard to pinpoint, but it's just really like, it's not how you want to start a business collaboration. So I decided not to do that. But there was this other person I really wanted to work with. He had started 30 companies in the past. I'm like, I want to start a company with this guy. So I picked up the phone, called him, and we started a company. So we did automated matchmaking between students and internships. So suddenly I'm in an entirely different industry again. Tried disrupting the recruitment industry, failed dramatically, ran out of money before we made enough money. That's how most startups go, I think. And we did that for 2 years, and that took me a bunch to Silicon Valley again, to San Diego a lot. I commuted between Stockholm and Gothenburg and Oslo. And I've been traveling a lot for the last few years. So did that for 2 years. 4 days. So I decided to leave that company after a couple of years I'm good on time. In March 2015. And so I decided to step back and take a break, essentially, because it wasn't working out. I was kind of, a mentor of mine once got a question when he was doing a similar session to this, and he got a question like, when do you know it's time to leave, right? When do you know when it's time to back out? And for me, like that question in that situation was like way before I actually did. Because like I was getting up every morning, like as I was opening my laptop, I was like nauseous. I'm like, I feel like I need to throw up. I'm like, that's not a good sign. When you have that every single day for like 6 weeks, it's like either you're pregnant or, and I was not pregnant. So I was like, you know what? It's time to just not do this anymore. Sadly, because I love the people I worked with. It was like great, amazing people, but just didn't work out. And then as that very same day where I made those phone calls and made this decision, that very same day, a friend of mine posted on Facebook that this thing called Singularity University had their application date in 4 days, or application deadline. And I knew him, and I'd kind of seen his journey through that. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to get in if I don't apply. So I kind of threw myself around, and for 4 days, threw together this application that a classmate of mine had spent 9 months making, but I was in a hurry. So I threw it together and sent it in, and they accepted me. And I'm still not quite sure how or why, but I ended up at Singularity summer 2015, which was an incredibly mind-blowing experience where, at this point, I'd been working with a bunch of different technology. I'd heard of this AI thing, but not quite. I'd never heard of blockchain. It was 2015, so I guess most people hadn't. There was so much I didn't know. And suddenly I found myself in this bubble for 10 weeks on the NASA Ames campus with 79 of the most brilliant classmates I've ever met in my life, surrounded by all these crazy techies, focusing on building shit that will literally change the world in a positive way. And you sit and have these endless night long, and that's kind of how parts of my bio that ended up on the poster came from, because you end up having this night-long conversations of I don't know if one of the most fascinating discussions to me is the Fermi Paradox, right? Statistically speaking, there is other life in the universe, so why haven't we heard from them, right? And those kind of paradoxes are if a robot tells us that it is conscious, is it? How can you tell? How do you measure what consciousness is? those kinds of discussions, right? We know how to make designer babies. Should we? Should you ever give a weapon to an autonomous system? No, you shouldn't. But like, should you ever? Like, these are kind of the discussions that we kept having like all night long. I pretty much didn't sleep for 3 months, and it was absolutely amazing. And then we started this company, and that's been going on ever since. And it's been quite a ride since then as well. So that was like the short story, and I've tried to cram everything into 20 minutes. I think that worked. Right, so I'll answer the second question first. My day, my days are mainly two things, ML or AI, then don't use it. Especially if you're a startup that is trying to solve a problem and you're like, it sounds really cool to have AI on our slides, so we're gonna just sprinkle that on there. Like, that's not, I mean, I see that a lot, and I think it's unfortunate, right? Use the technology that is best applicable to the problem you need to solve. And that's that. In terms of what we do, so let me see what level to put this on. So basically what we do is text understanding, right? Which is one of the fields of AI, if you want to put it that way, or one of the areas where AI is applied, or machine learning. And when I say machine learning, AI, for those who don't know the fields at all, they're really, today they're synonymous, right? AI is the big umbrella term, and then machine learning is the slightly, perhaps a little bit smaller umbrella term, and then we talk about neural networks and deep learning. And today they're fairly synonymous, but they have not always been, and they will not always be. And we will see changes in all of these terms, but AI is the biggest and sometimes fluffiest umbrella term. And we have a tendency to, when something actually like gets into our phones, like Siri or whatever, we're like, it's not very intelligent. This is clearly not AI, right? It's just technology. And really, it's just software. It just learns a little better and different and functions a little different than other software. And that's what it comes down to. But what we do is natural language understanding. And so I said earlier that it's about helping researchers, right? So the researcher write down 300 to 500 words about the problem that they're trying to solve. Our machine takes that text. We start with extracting the key words of that text. What are the most meaning-bearing words in that text? The next thing we do is that we work with contextual synonyms. So we've trained the machine on a data set of 18 million research papers. And we basically take the first 11 words of the first sentence of the first paper and look at, and we give the machine the 5 first and the 5 last words, and we tell it to guess the word in the middle. And we move one word to the side, guess the word in the middle. And you repeat that for, however many combinations of word there is in 18 million research papers, and you build out this model of what words do different researchers use in the same context. And doing that, we find contextual synonyms. And basically what we do for you as a user is that we don't require you to know all the synonyms that is applicable in the problem you're looking at. And again, technology solving a problem. Then we also work with something called topic modeling, where we look at, so here's these 5 million research papers or 18 million research papers, depending on the data set. We ask the machine to divide those papers into topics for us. This is, again, across disciplines. We don't care whether we published it in chemistry or particle physics. We just take these papers and cluster them. Why are they relevant to each other? And then we ask the machine to find 10 words that best describe this little cluster of papers. And so we take the words that the machine finds, we take the synonyms, and we take the words from the text, we turn that into a fingerprint. And then we do fingerprint matching with other research papers. Does that make sense? You're with me? And so we do this fingerprint matching, pull it in, present it in a visual format. This tool, we do have a free version on our website that you can try if you want. You're restricted to not your own text, but to paste in the URL of one research paper to find others and to be matched with others. And it's all open access papers on our site. So that's the kind of the exploration tool. So we help you through this broad exploration through these fingerprints that we build. And that's the machine learning techniques behind that. And for those who know the field a little bit better, it's TF-IDF, neural topic modeling, and word-to-vec and word embeddings that we're working with. And we're also working on hierarchical topic modeling right now. In this, and I'll also add this one, I'll add the second part of it. We are launching a new tool within the next few weeks. In this process that I now described, you're going to find thousands of papers, right? And they might be relevant, some of it might be noise, but it's going to be way too much for you to read. So we have this iterative tool based on many of the similar technologies where you take that big corpus and you narrow it down in this iterative process. And again, like it's cool technology, but really what it does is it solves a problem. You have 3,000 articles, you really only need the top, say, 30. And we help you by applying these fingerprints and looking at the topics and looking at the concepts, we help you narrow down. So that's the answer to that. So that was the second one. A little bit more detail about the blockchain. I will mainly say wait for our white paper. But basically, so today, the incentive for an academic is, for the individual researcher, is to just get published, get the point score, get it through, ideally in as prestigious journal as possible, because that is where you get the most visibility and the most credibility. And this is also what your university wants you to do. And I'm speaking generally here. And that's fine and dandy. The publishing houses that are publishing these papers today have about a 44% profit margin, depending on a variety of things, but a 44% profit margin. And Jeff Bezos has famously said, and I don't have the exact quote that he said, but like, if you want to build a cool company and get rich, go for the industries that has the biggest profit margins, because they're the ones that needs to be disrupted. So that's kind of the starting point. These publishing houses had a really, really vital role. And they had a business model that worked, because they had a lot of manual labor in that process, right? Imagine pre-internet, right? You had to like manually submit manuscripts, you had to read them by hand, edit them by hand, print it, not by hand, but you know what I mean, and then publish it and then distribute it, right? You had this business model that was really, really heavy and a lot of manual labor. It made sense that it costs a lot. But today the situation is that there's a number of Greek universities that post everything that's happened in Europe over the last few years can no longer afford to buy access to scientific articles and journals, right? So you have literally researchers and academics who cannot access the academic content of the world, right? While these publishing houses sit and take 44%. And I'm not saying that all of those publishing houses need to go away, because I think everyone, there is a role for everything, but there is a clear misaligned incentive in this whole process where the universities are locked to a point system on the prestigious level of these papers and these journals. The universities are locked to that, though we see, from what I hear, and I'd love to hear more about that, but Germany is doing a little bit of an uproar these days against Elsevier. I believe, if someone knows more about that, because someone told me that the other day and I'm quite excited, Germany and the Netherlands. And the EU is also now coming out with directives that EU researchers that are funded, or researchers that are funded by EU money, has to publish open access, i.e. without paywalls as well. But the researcher still has to pay to do that, right? You can't just as a researcher say, I want it to be open. You have to pay the publishing house to be allowed to publish it openly, right? So there are so many misaligned incentives and an industry that has ridiculously high profit margins because they're stuck in an old business model that worked really well and now isn't working anymore, right? And then what you see, if you see it from the big picture, is that much like the music industry had Napster come in and tear everything apart, and then Spotify came out of the heap of burning timber, and other services too. I'm not saying that Spotify is the ultimate one. The same way you see that now, like you have Sci-Hub, for those who are not familiar with it, who are doing incredibly illegal things, much like Napster was. She's sitting in Russia, and she has a $14 million fine against her, fine against her from Elsevier and via the court system. And and she's building this service where all of the research in the world is available to everyone, including the paywall content. And obviously, this is a breach of copyright and everything. But you're seeing this industry that is being torn apart. And what we believe that there is a change coming, and we believe that we can be an actor. When it comes to the specific blockchain question, obviously, it is about getting the right incentives. And where was I going with it? I had a way to explain it that made sense in my head, and now it disappeared. So anyway, I wasn't sure where I was going. No, so Right. Here's the point. So part of what we want to build in this AI tool is what we call a knowledge validation engine, or an engine where you can input a paper or a hypothesis or a statement and get it validated up against all of the research in the world. Say that you're developing a new drug, and you're targeting a specific protein with that drug, and you validate that, and you say that this is going to be great. It's going to work perfectly. It's worked in the lab, and you send that paper out, and turns out this specific protein, only functions on, or that process with that protein only, works on a certain temperature, right? And that temperature might be out of the range of the body, right? That can survive in the body. So suddenly, that paper that might be in a completely different field and not related to medicine at all will actually disprove your paper, right? Or just highlight that other things needs to be in place too, right? And that's what we call a knowledge validation engine. So a system that kind of does one of the functions of peer review up against all of the research in the world. Now, if we want to build an engine that can validate all of the world's knowledge, we cannot sit as the entity in the middle and decide what the truth is and what validation is, right? We cannot be the determining factor, and neither can the Elsevier's of the world or the Googles of the world, right? So what we want to do is build this decentralized community, and we're aiming at that to be a truly decentralized community of academics, of coders, of people who are just really geeky about science that can come together and actually do this. And we're starting it, but we don't want to own it in the long run. We don't want to be the determining actor in this. And the mechanics and the supply-demand policies of this entire economic ecosystem is a little beyond what I'm going to go into details on right now, but we are publishing a white paper on it in a few weeks, as I said. So happy to talk more about that offline as well. Also going to keep an eye on time. All right, so that was the second. Can we remove the two bottom questions? Oh, she's gone. Cool. I'll just answer the top one then. Hopefully she'll be back before we get there. So yeah, so quality of data and biases in data and trolling is a super exciting question. So we all are aware that fake news is a massive problem, and people online can say anything and do anything. I was watching a really interesting video today about how someone basically invented a restaurant on which site was it? You were nodding. Yeah, so invented this restaurant and basically put this hey, there's a restaurant, and faked all of the reviews, and actually ended up being the #1 restaurant in London online. The restaurant did not exist, but they've taken some fake photos and stuff like that. So it's really easy to create fake news, et cetera, on the internet. I'm not going to comment on the kind of fake news specifically portion of this, because that is not the field we're operating in. And I think it comes with a specific, alt-right, right-wing, a number of things that are problematic. So I'm not going to go too much into that. That's also not what we're working on. But that is, the problem of, avoiding trolling, avoiding faking information, avoiding spamming. So one of the things that we want to do, right, to give a very concrete example, is that we want, or we already do this, have people help us train the tool, right? So you build this annotated data set. You take a research paper, and you go through a few different steps to make annotations on it digitally. And so we do that. And one of the first things we want to do with this ecosystem is to start generating, have that generate tokens, right? So you can start earning these tokens that will eventually, have a value in Ether, because we're building on top of Ethereum. And so, of course, someone could just make a bot that just fills that out with random things, right? And then they'd make a bunch of tokens, money, and be very happy, right? So obviously, there are things you can put in place to avoid that. So we are right now developing an algorithm specifically to avoid that from happening. So that is one thing. You do need to take kind of safety measures, I guess, from people who would maliciously try to game the system to, earn from it. And I think it's easy to be, and I sometimes go in that trap. I'm a little too naive. I'm people wouldn't do that. We're a big, big community, big family. We're all trying to solve a big problem, but that's sadly not the case. So there's algorithms and mechanisms you can do to actually measure that. Some things as simple as putting in a random word, and if someone picks it, you're like, you don't know what you're doing. This must be, you know, not correct. Two more advanced kind of mathematical approaches to it. So that's one thing. The other side of that is that, and that's also the reason why we want to do this open source and entirely open and transparent. The data sets should be open, the code should be open, the algorithms that are used, and everything that happens needs to be open so that people can hold each other accountable and actually point out issues and flaws and challenge each other in the process. So I hope that answered some of the questions at least. I mean, this is a tricky thing, right? And in one way, it's the same question as it is with the citation system, which, for those of you who are not familiar with that part either, the citation system also has a number of misaligned incentives, right? Because if you, as a young researcher, you write your first couple of papers, and you're about to publish the first one, and you need to start citing people, right? And obviously, there are some papers that are really relevant to what you do, and that's great. And then there's also this like big shot professor that is like working at this conference, and you're like, maybe if he sees his name in there, he will be a little bit more happy with the paper I've written, and you put his name in there, right? And there are examples of kind of some of the most cited papers in the world having been proven wrong, or just new proof coming out showing that that was no longer the case. You know, they keep being cited most highly because they are the ones cited most highly, because they are the ones cited most highly, and they just keep being there even though they're technically not valid anymore, right? So there are all of these kind of skewed data sets in the world, and we do have a obsession, I will call it that, with biases, and that we try to whether it's kind of deliberate biases, as in someone trolling the system, or whether it's a bias that is embedded in a system that is, you know, turns out over time that is flawed. And one of the things I find really interesting with AI, if we take a step back from what exactly we do, is that when we are mindful of it, and I'm not saying that everyone who builds AI is, there is a really interesting piece in the New York Times from, I think it's a couple of years ago now, that says AI has a white guy problem, which really is true, sadly. And there's nothing wrong with being a white guy. It's just like being an entirely heterogeneous group of people trying to come up with a good new system is a problem no matter who you are. And that is the case, you know, in software development in general, but in AI it becomes that much more visible because you select these data sets that the algorithms learn from, right? And if you're not mindful when you select your data sets, you're going to run into issues, right? And it's not that, you know, women or people of color are so darn more mindful than other people, but when you come together with a bunch of people with different lived experiences, you just see things from different angles. And you get a diverse team together and you're like, oh, you know, there's a really good example, which is like one of the default examples. You might have heard it before, but Face App, which is the app, you take a picture of yourself, you can put a filter on so you get old, a filter on so you get young. You know, there's a filter on that said hot, and this black guy took a picture of himself, put on the hot filter, and it made his cheeks white and his nose narrower, right? And the problem there isn't that someone, you know, maliciously has gone in and coded that. The problem is that the data set selected had all white people in it. So the person selecting that data set has simply not gone in and thought, I wonder, could it be that we should find a diverse crowd of beauty? Like that was not on their mind. And I'm going to take a wild guess that it was a white guy, but I'm not, you know, I don't know. I don't know that, and I might be wrong. But that's the problem, right? We need that mindfulness. But the fascinating part that I think is that we're talking about this a lot more these days, right? We're having these discussions. And what we find, and there's another good example, and I'm not going to tell the whole story, but basically same issue with racist algorithms in a Florida police district, right? Essentially, is this person likely to be a repeat offender or not? ProPublica found that the long story short, the algorithm is racist. This is people's lives we're talking about, right? It's highly problematic. But here's the interesting thing, right? The judges in the court system of Florida, are they going to be less racist, right? I mean, let's face it, most of the time, in the US at least, they're not, right? The US has an incredibly problematic legal system and justice system and police system, and let's not, you know, dig into all the details there. But in building these algorithms and actually starting to have that discussion going, wait a minute, why is there more police in, minority neighborhoods in the US? And like looking at the data and starting dissecting it, suddenly we're having these discussions. Because it's really hard to measure like what goes on in a judge's head. But when you actually have it quantified and in numbers, you can backtrack it and reverse engineer it and go, hey, we have a problem here. And that's what I find really fascinating with the discussion we're having these days. We can actually start questioning kind of our own inherent biases and assumptions as we quantify. But we need these discussions because I think a lot of the people who are building our AI system don't really have these discussions. So we need to have them. That was a long detour from the question, but I hope that answered it. How do you split responsibilities and equity between the 4 co-founders? We're awfully Scandinavian. We're like, we are equal. That's, that was the starting point. Like, we are 4 equal co-founders. We all contribute equally. There is an interesting model for those of you, and it wasn't, from the beginning we had that discussion a lot. There's a really interesting model called slicing the pie. And I'm not going to go into the mechanics of it, but like, there's 2 things that's important, right, when you start a company. Point A, don't give people equity on day 1, right? Even yourself, don't give yourself the equity on day 1. Make sure you have a framework in place that says if you leave, you do not get that equity. You might get part of it if you worked for a year or more. Make sure you put yourself and your co-founder on a cliff and a vesting schedule. Because there's so many companies that go down with that, right? And I think most of us have heard of examples of that where, you're 2 people from the start, it's all nice and dandy until it isn't, and then suddenly someone leaves and have 35% of the company just sitting there in equity. You can't really, like, it's dead, right? And that's a big problem, especially when you then get VCs in who are like, who is this person that owns 35% and we've never seen, right? So those, agreements of vesting schedules and cliffs and et cetera is really important. There is this really interesting slicing the pie model, which basically seems, let's say that you're a researcher, a technical co-founder, and a business co-founder. And the researcher already, and this is not from our company, this is just a general model, right? The researcher already has their academic job and may or may not leave it depending on whether the company gets funding or whatever it is, right? The developer, has a side gig and works as a consultant. The business person might join full-time or whatever it is, right? We all have our different life situations. And the question is, like, do you split it in 3? Is it, does the researcher have the idea? Is that worth more than the, the person, et cetera? And slicing the pie is this one way of doing it where you essentially assign different value to different contributions, right? So say the business person has started a business before, comes in with a little bit of money, right? So that's an asset. And you have a specific multiplier for cash because cash is one of the most valuable things a company needs. Then you also have some IP and you can put a number on that. And then you have the time spent. And actually, this is a tracking system where you have a set date, and on that set date, the equity is distributed per this algorithm. So it's a mathematical approach to measure your contribution, and you just agree on it up front, you follow it, and at the end of the day, you might end up with 20, 30, 50, or whatever it is, right? So it's an interesting approach. We started out looking at that pretty in depth. It does take a bit of management, but it is also a really interesting framework to use. The impact factor is an interesting one. I'm taking take the top question first, though, from Mr. Robot. So how we got the first customers and the first pre-seed funding. First customers. So in the beginning, both the very first investor, which was 2 years ago now, the very first investor was a friend of a friend who is an investor and an impact investor. I didn't actually approach him for an investment. I was pulled in by one of his colleagues for this project. They were doing this thing called Catapult Future Fest in Oslo, and they wanted me to kind of, as I had just returned from Singularity, they're like, you have the right mindset, come join us for this festival we're creating. So I kind of jumped in for a few meetings. During lunch, I just happened to mention that we were just starting fundraising, and he's like, well, I'm an investor, and then, we took it from there. And I didn't actually approach him for an investment, but he got introduced and was curious about what we did. So it's very much kind of I mean, networking is one of my least favorite words in the world. You'll also find that when you speak to me one-on-one, I might be really socially awkward. I'm not a good networker at all. I'm far better like on stage in front of 1,000 people than like, hello, what's your name? Let's talk. Because I'm like, I can't do small talk. It's horrible. But yeah, so like building out a network of really amazing people does get you far, right? Doing things like, yeah, saying yes to like random things, showing like the whole Catapult Future Fest thing. Like, a woman I know, she was like, you should join for this. It's super fun. It's a bunch of awesome people. And I'm like, sure, I'll do it. I had no idea what I got myself into. And further down the line, I wasn't able to kind of fully follow up on it, on the long-term thing of, but I had some impact in the early beginning of the festival, right? So I contributed a little bit there, just for the fun of it. Like there was no incentives other than like, hey, we're some cool people and we talk about some cool stuff. Do you want to come join us? I'm like, sure, let's do it. And that's where I met him, and he ended up investing. And then once you get the first investor, the ball is kind of rolling because it's like, oh, he's your investor. Oh, cool. Well, and that gives you a sign of confidence. So it is a lot about, again, networking, hate the word, but knowing people and kind of being part of and being present and visible. Periodically, I try to get on stage as often as I can, and periodically I have to say I don't do speaking gigs right now because I have to focus on the company. But periodically, it's really good for the company to be visible, right? For a while, iris.ai was like the coolest Norwegian startup company because we were very, very visible, and that was really early. Like we didn't even have a product. We had pretty much nothing, but we were very visible and talking about what we were going to do. That landed us some early investments that then got us a product that we can then attract more investment on. And then on the clients, which was the second half of the question, on the client side, it's a lot of, so we had a couple of kind of random opportunity clients, what I call them that, where it's like, hey, we like what you do. We have this thing. It might be a good fit. We can pay you a bit for it. And we're like, sure, let's try that, So the very first client we had is really, really far from what we actually do today. There's always a balance in that between, because the last thing you want to do is become a consultancy company, unless you build a consultancy company, then it's fine. But if you're trying to build a SaaS company or a software solution company, you really don't want to become a consultancy company just because you have all these clients. And like our technology essentially understands text and can match it with other texts. There's a lot of need for that in a number of different industries. Like I don't even know how many legal firms have contacted us and gone, hey, can you like build your tool for contract law or like case law or whatever it is, right? And I think there could be a market opportunity there. The problem is like we couldn't care less about law. I should say I couldn't care less about law. I don't know about Jacobo, but it's not an area. Like my dad's a lawyer, so I should add that disclaimer. Like sure, great. We could build a great tool, make a bunch of money, but like I don't have that passion. I don't have that interest. We did a couple of trials and had a couple of kind of clients we were talking to, and at the end it was like, you know what, this is not something that's going to get us all excited and want to jump up in the morning and do this. So that's kind of, it's great to grab those opportunities, but also finding the balance in it. And again, it helps being visible. It helps being on stage. It helps talking about it, getting in front of people, and just talking about everything you want to do. And I think that's changed a little bit now. How are we doing on time? Ooh, I should probably wrap up soon. I think it's changed a little bit now. In Norway in 2009, you didn't talk about your ideas. I have no idea how this is here now in Germany and elsewhere in Europe for that matter. But like there was a lot of like, you don't talk about your ideas. You don't talk about what you're doing. You're running this startup, there's this technology, but it's like super secret. And I'm like, then you're not going to get any clients and you're not going to get any investors. Because like really you need to be out, unless you have something that is and clearly needs to be patentable, then for God's sake, don't go out and talk about it yet. But unless you have that, talk about it to as many people as you can. Because if someone else takes your idea and goes and builds it and like launches it and executes before you do, it wasn't meant to be at all. Like you have to go build it. And you get those serendipitous things, right? You get those random people who are like, oh, I know someone who was just looking for that, and then suddenly you're connected with someone, and you do this trial, and suddenly you have your first client. And then the second part of the client question is, we just did a lot of cold sales outreach at one point. When we're getting close to a product that is sellable, let's go sell it. And we sold it. That was the short story. But you just go out and sell. And have that business team, and don't lock yourself in and build product too long. It's always a good balance, though. Our CTO is also sometimes like, don't oversell it, because like, we're not quite there yet. Don't, no, I cannot deliver next month. Give me another 6, and that's fair enough. And so there's always a balance in that. But yeah, I think that was that. I'm not going to keep you longer because I've been talking for an hour, and you're probably sick of listening to me. So I'm going to stop there. It was really awesome that so many people came. I did not expect that from the get-go, because I was like, sure, I can pop in here and talk for a bit. But I'm excited to have you all here. I'll hang around for a little while longer if you want to come say hi or have any more questions that you want to ask. So thank you.